I'm Will Chamberlain.
I'm Amber Duke.
I'm Inez Stepman.
I'm Ben Weingarten.
And this is NatCon Squad, where common good and common sense meet. NatCon Squad is produced by the Edmund Burke Foundation, the home for national conservatism. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also a reminder before we get started into topics that the NatCon 5 conference will be held in Washington, D.C., September 2nd to the 4th. Sign up at nationalconservatism.org and don't miss the conservative event of the year. I'm going to be speaking, and plenty of other cool people are going to be speaking. I think a number of people are going to be speaking. We'll find out. But anyway, so yes, come to the conference. All right, today, topics. First, Ben will be covering Russiagate and the revelations from Tulsi Gabbard about the conduct of the intelligence community under Obama. Then Inez is going to cover the massive Columbia settlement. I'm going to be covering the situation with U.S. attorneys, Haba and Asali risking not getting confirmed or losing their jobs. And finally, Amber is going to talk about the Democrats' position for the 2028 race. So go straight to Ben.
Thanks. So we'll delve deeply, I think, in the Russiagate rabbit hole today, but I want to level set by talking at a very high level about the revelations in recent weeks, one of which we already covered, which came from the CIA's own review under Director Radcliffe of the so-called intelligence community assessment back in 2016, and then the declassified version put forth in January of 2017, where some of the intelligence community said that basically Putin wanted Trump to win, preferred him over Clinton, and sought to help him do so. And this was, of course, a cornerstone of the Trump-Russia collusion narrative, and, of course, elevated by the Obama administration and all of its minions to start the entire Russiagate narrative publicly and cast a cloud over the Trump presidency. In recent weeks, we've seen now, and really in recent days, we've seen further disclosures from Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, two separate sets of reports. One of them was on the creation of this intelligence community assessment and what the intelligence community was saying prior to its delivery and then after. And basically what the report shows is that the intelligence community going into the fall of 2016 basically said that Russia lacked the capability or the intent to influence the outcomes of our election. That was the view of the intelligence community, not only running up to the election, but then in its aftermath as well. And just as the intelligence community was going to put out that assessment and a presidential daily brief to the same effect, and there's a draft document out there that the DNI has put out, that document said on December 8th, 2016, quote, Russian criminal actors did not impact recent U.S. election results by conducting malicious cyber activities against election infrastructure, among other assertions. And there was no evidence of cyber manipulation of election infrastructure intended to alter results, etc. The report was pulled, and Barack Obama holds a meeting on December 9th with all the heads of the deep state or their deputies. And after that, there's a rushed effort to develop a new intelligence community assessment, one that will ultimately contradict what the intelligence community was saying prior to that point. And that would lead to, of course, this infamous intelligence community assessment. There's much more reporting on that in the DNI report, which is worth checking out. But then the real bombshell, arguably, that came out the week that we're recording this episode was the declassification of this House Intelligence Committee report, which was locked down at Langley for years up until now, where they examined the claim that Donald Trump, that Vladimir Putin wanted Donald Trump to win, that he did everything he could to essentially help him achieve that end. And this goes into not just the inclusion of the garbage, unverified, uncorroborated Steele dossier, which the intelligence community included in its assessment that was declassified, but never told us that it included. And we now know they only included this reference to Steele dossier to justify the idea that Putin wanted to help Trump, was aligned with Trump. But we now know that they only included that in the Not even just the top secret report that was delivered to Congress, so Congress didn't know they included the Steele dossier, but only in what was briefed to Barack Obama himself and senior national security officials and Donald Trump. So they used the Steele dossier to back this intelligence community assessment, but we didn't know that. We never received that in the declassified version that the American public saw, and even the top secret version delivered to Congress, they never had it. But this HPSI report, which was authored under Devin Nunes, who Americans continue to owe a debt of gratitude to, as well as, of course, Kash Patel and others. What this HPSI report shows is that the intelligence community assessment that Putin wanted, aspired for Trump to win, preferred him over Clinton, was based on utter garbage that the CIA collected human intelligence reports that the CIA officials wouldn't even publish, wouldn't even use. But John Brennan directed the analysts to use it in developing this intelligence community assessment. And so what they conclude in this HPSI report are a couple things. One, that Brennan directed that these three substandard intelligence reports in connection with the ICA be used, which contained information that was, quote, unclear, of uncertain origin, potentially biased or implausible. And that, directly quoting here from HPSI's investigation, those became foundational sources for the ICA judgments that Putin preferred Trump over Clinton. And then, maybe even more damning than that, quote, one scant, unclear, and unverifiable fragment of a sentence from one of the substandard reports constitutes the only classified information cited to suggest Putin aspired to help Trump win. Now, there are many other revelations from this report, including, for example, and there's been some light made of this in media reports, that Russia had all of this damning information, for example, about Hillary Clinton's health issues and mental state, and that they sat on that. So if they wanted Trump to win, why didn't they release that information? We know that the intelligence community didn't consider a whole slew of plausible alternative explanations for these assessments. But when you start to go down the rabbit hole of what the intelligence community actually used to claim that Russia preferred Trump over Clinton and that they aspired to help him win, you find that there's no there. It's basically all hearsay, and the intelligence community couldn't even find the sources or necessarily the subsources of some of these claims. So it's remarkable the garbage that they laundered through these reports. We kind of always assumed it, but now we have a lot of the details that have been lacking for years. Where was John Durham in all this, by the way? What did he know and when did he know it? What did he sit on? That's one question that we have to ask. We could delve into any number of the different revelations from that HPSI report, but where I would leave this to tee off the conversation is, we have evidence of basically this massive fraud perpetrated and foisted on the American people. The intelligence community shunted all of their standards in making these claims that were used to frame Trump as a Russian agent, and then obviously to then lead to investigations into everyone in Trump world, to the Mueller special counsel and beyond. We know that it was Barack Obama that directed the creation of this report, and it was really John Brennan and Jim Comey in particular, but also Clapper, of course, who pushed for this garbage so-called intelligence community assessment. And we know that there have been criminal referrals. We don't know what those criminal referrals consist of. Is it about perjury? Is it about conspiracy to defraud the U.S.? Is it about conspiracy to violate Donald Trump's rights or the rights of others? The very charges, by the way, that were leveled against Donald Trump, are they going to be hoisted on the same petard they created? Question would be, what do you guys think ultimately happens in terms of criminal referrals? Can any of these people be prosecuted, particularly successfully, particularly if the venue is, say, Washington, D.C. or the Eastern District of Virginia? Or if not, ultimately, what are the costs and benefits of successful prosecution or unsuccessful prosecution to the extent you pursue these and these people walk? I think all open questions worth grappling with.
I'm always
Yeah,
pessimistic about potential prosecutions and their ability to actually lead to accountability for these people. But just to hit on a couple of things you mentioned, Ben, and then introduce something else in the conversation, the Durham point is so important because I hear consistently from people that I debate on the left about this issue. Well, Well, Durham's investigation only led to one person admitting to criminality and having to plead guilty to what was ultimately a pretty low sentence. Kevin Kleinsmith, of course, who was found to have manipulated those FISA warrants. So Durham obviously missed a huge tranche of information that could have led to much greater accountability of really the top key players in this, not just the FBI lackeys underneath James Comey. And then on your point about the Steele dossier, that's so important too, because we were at first told that the Steele dossier was only used in a limited capacity to obtain FISA warrants. Now we find confirmation that it actually was central to the entire investigation, which, by the way, John Brennan apparently did against the advice of these intelligence analysts who told him that this was not up to the level that they would typically expect of a document being used to warrant an investigation. And he told them, don't worry about that. I've got this super secret other classified information that I can't tell you about that I'm totally sure confirms that Russia was trying to get Trump elected and that Trump was probably helping them do so. One other thing I wanted to mention that wasn't covered is that that presidential daily briefing that was pulled by Obama and then rejiggered to include this faux assessment that Russia was actively trying to help Trump win. The timing was very curious because it was after Trump won the election, and there's been heavy implication and suggestion from DNI Tulsi Gabbard that perhaps the intelligence showing that Russia was not trying to actively help Trump, that there wasn't this grand scheme to boost his presidency, was deliberately kept from the presidential daily briefing so that Trump himself would not see evidence that that basically cleared him and his campaign from collusion.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much here. So I just want to list a few of the things, some of them overlapping with what Ben and Amber just said. But to me, which were the most salient points of the things that we've learned this week, which I, for the record, do not think it is a nothing burger. I know that there are some people even who I respect, like Andy McCarthy, who have downplayed what's in this report. Now, maybe I haven't been following it until this point as closely as I should have. But to me, these are 6 things that are either new or newly confirmed by this report. It might have been something that we've suspected in the past, but newly confirmed by the information that was released this week. One is Obama's direct involvement in this. He ordered, there's an email that says, President ordered a reassessment of this intelligence information. So there is direct evidence that Obama ordered essentially the intelligence community after the intelligence community had come to this conclusion that Russia did not really interfere, one, was not effective in interfering in U.S. elections, and two, that there was no credible or substantial evidence that they were interfering on behalf of Trump, as opposed to the thing that they do every election, which is try to sow chaos, try to make difficulties, try to undermine any kind of trust in the election system, right? So this reassessment that happened after this meeting, there's emails that say Obama ordered this, right? So I think that's a really important piece of evidence that came out this week. Second, the plausible deniability case, right? So much of this, if this ultimately goes to criminal referrals, if those criminal referrals go anywhere, rather, right? So much of this goes to judgment and assessment, right? A lot of these officials who are involved in this are going to say, well, I thought that this was credible. I thought that Trump really was involved in this collusion, right? Or at least I thought that Russia was trying to help Trump, even if Trump was not aware of it, right? So it's all goes to the believability. And what this report shows is that each one of these key players was told over and over and over again by the people under them about the weakness of the information that came to the conclusions that they wanted to find. So to me, that's important because it speaks to mens rea, right? It speaks to the implausibility of them saying, well, we believed it, right? And people, when they had people coming to them over and over again in each one of these branches saying, this is not up to the standards of statecraft, this is not up to the standards of evidence that these intelligence agencies usually use, there is good reason to believe that this is essentially just made up. And so each one of them had those guys coming to them, telling them that, and we have a record now of that happening. Third is that piece that Amber mentioned about Hillary. I think there was a bunch of information that Russia had about Hillary Clinton. Now, granted, we don't know if this information is true or false. I want to put it out there. This is Russian information about Hillary Clinton. What is certain is they didn't release it. So they had information that they didn't release. Whether it's true or not, we can't say. But by the way, one of the things that is listed, everyone's talking about the fact that she's on tranquilizers or whatever, which, as you recall, was a key issue in that campaign. It is something that was reported on, the fact that she was kind of falling over. She seemed dizzy. She seemed out of it, right? That was something that was an issue in the campaign. And if Russia was trying to help Donald Trump in the campaign, there was a perfect moment for them to try to seed that information into U.S. media. They didn't do that, right? But I think the more interesting piece about Hillary potential story that might be true is that apparently the State Department, according to the Russians, which again, I want to say, according to the Russians, we don't know if this is true or not, the State Department was used to go to different religious organizations. My guess is in this context, like black churches in various states, and promised more State Department grants and goodies to their organizations if they would go out and stump for Hillary Clinton. That itself, if it were true, would be a scandal, right? And then for the absolute weakness of the evidence, I mean, I didn't imagine that it was this week. And, you know, I have not believed for a long time that there was any credible evidence that was tying Donald Trump's campaign to the Russians, right? Or a major Russian interference in the election. But the thinness of the information is hard to believe until you actually read it. And you realize, as Ben said, it's literally a fragment of a sentence with no attribution, no backup evidence, right? We don't know if it's secondhand information, thirdhand information, telephone information. We don't know who said it about the fact that, you know, Putin preferred Trump. We don't know the context in which that was said. It's possible it was even said in the context of the Republican primary, by the way, right? Which was not finished by this time, if you recall, because there was an effort to withhold the nomination from Trump at the convention. So, I mean, it's just totally without context, no attribution, no additional evidence. This one fragment of a sentence plus the Steele dossier, which leads me to my fifth point. The Steele dossier was part of the main body of this report, and was taken out for the version that they seeded in all of these different media organizations and leaked, right? There were two versions of it, one with the Steele dossier only in the annex and one in the main part of the report. So this is, to me, one concrete potential place for criminal referrals. It's pretty bold to me that John Brennan lied about this. And the version of the report that was the most classified, that was circulated among the highest actors, did use the Steele dossier in the main body of the report. That's something concrete. And then finally, what I just alluded to with the media role. There's a huge media role here. Basically, they ordered this reassessment. Before they had any time to actually dig into any of this information, they released, and a bunch of people leaked to the Washington Post, the New York Times, et cetera, a version of this with the weakness of the evidence redacted, but not the conclusions. Basically, they put out a copy of this that had these very strong top-line conclusions. I said, this is the conclusion of our intelligence agency, that Putin wanted Trump to win and that he interfered with American elections to make that happen. Both parts of that predicate were based on a couple pieces of obviously flimsy evidence that the key players in this knew that was flimsy because people repeatedly pointed it out to them. But that specific evidence was removed or redacted or left out of what they leaked into the media to create this narrative. So to me, those are all things that either we didn't know before or we didn't have concrete evidence of before. And I think those things are huge bombshells. I find it hard to believe that anyone who is not completely in the tank at this point and still believes this hoax, even though it's obviously false, would say this is not the biggest political scandal in American history. We have an incoming administration duly elected by the American people, and we have a documented attempt from the highest players of government, including the president, to essentially put a cloud over his entire administration, to embroil him in investigations on things that they knew were false and they knew were weak. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say. Then that is a huge scandal. I don't know where the criminal referrals are going to go, but that is at minimum a enormous political scandal. So I don't want to hear a single person ever say again that the biggest scandal of Obama's tenure was that he wore a tan suit. That's my bottom line.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much more I have to add. I think there is real criminal liability here that has been kind of disregarded. There's a serious conspiracy against President Trump's rights. And you think about all the people who had to hire lawyers, get subpoenaed, go in to deal with this completely fabricated story. We should be deeply offended by it. And there's plenty new here. We didn't have these intelligence assessments that were made by the Obama administration before the election. We didn't see the email change that showed them basically do a complete 180 on the intelligence to kind of create the new product that they wanted. So I think it's a real scandal, and everybody's got the right handle on it. All right, next is the Columbia settlement and Inez.
Yeah, hopefully this is a little bit less complicated, a little more straightforward. So the Trump administration and the Columbia University has reached a $221 million, settlement. And the terms of that settlement are interesting and hopeful, I think. So first of all, of course, off the top, there's a big fine. I should say that this settlement is over Title VI violations and the failure of Columbia University to provide Title VI protections to Jewish students on campus during the protests that happened summer before last. That being said, the terms of the settlement are much broader and sweep in stuff that would fall under different parts of the Civil Rights Act and makes demands that go beyond, I would say, like anything related to Title VI, Jewish students or protests. So basically this decree demands that the university will stop having any programs or proxies with regard to admission that unfairly illegally use race. It says that the university cannot discriminate on the basis of race in admissions. It says that they can use no proxy to discriminate on the basis of race. And they also it has the same requirements for hiring. Okay, so any professorates that they're handing out, any jobs at the university, anywhere from administration all the way to professor, any like university hire that is done cannot be done on the basis of race whatsoever. It says cannot use race as a factor at all, either implicitly or explicitly. So all that sounds good. The big question would be, how do we enforce this? And actually, I think the enforcement mechanism in this could turn out to be very, very good. We don't know yet. We don't know what. I'm sure the university will try its best to get around this settlement. That being said, there is a monitor appointed. And twice a year, Columbia University has to release all of their numbers, whether that's in admissions. So that means all of their test scores, all of the GPAs, right, broken down by race and national origin. They have to give that both to an independent monitor and to the Trump administration. They have to give it to the federal government to essentially crunch the numbers and see if they are discriminating on the basis of race. Same thing with hiring. They have to give their numbers, their hiring numbers, their firing numbers, their promotion numbers to a independent monitor and to the federal government twice a year. So to me, this looks pretty good. Trump has come out and said this is the shape of things to come. More universities should expect to be swept up under these kinds of settlements with the federal government. They've made themselves open to those settlements by flagrantly violating the Civil Rights Act in every way that they could possibly imagine in the name of wokeness and activism. I should say there are also some things in this settlement about keeping protests under control and lawful, not allowing protesters to wear masks that disguise their identity. There's a few other elements in there, but all of these things will be tasked. The monitor will be tasked with enforcing this. And then ultimately, as I said, there's that backstop that I think is incredibly important of releasing the underlying data, which has been very closely guarded by universities, up until that SFFA case, right? One of the reasons that it was really difficult to sue universities for the obvious discrimination was that you didn't have access to that underlying admissions data. Now, Columbia University, as part of this agreement, agreement will be releasing all of that data, both on hiring and admissions, to the federal government. That will make future lawsuits and enforcement very easy, comparatively to in the past. So I think this looks pretty good. Coupled with this week, we had Marco Rubio announcing that he is reviewing the visa program for Harvard University, another shot across the bow in terms of university funding and their ability, their privilege to be able to send students, essentially refer students to the State Department to get a student visa to come internationally into the United States. So all of this looks pretty good to me. I don't know what you guys think. I think this is probably a pretty good settlement. I know some people are skeptical that anything can be done to universities. I kind of think, I guess I'm a little optimistic on this and have been very pessimistic in the past on the university sector and the ability to steer it. But I think they are realizing how financially pulled in they are vis-a-vis the federal government, and the Trump administration is using all of those levers and financial incentives very, very effectively here. And to me, this settlement reads as a very smart settlement from people in the Trump administration who knew what to ask for and knew what to demand in terms of follow-up and compliance. So again, I think this is great. I don't know what you guys think.
No, I totally agree. And of course, we have the announcement this week of students who were involved in those protests being disciplined with 1 to 3 year suspensions, degree revocations, full-on expulsions. And Columbia kind of said at the time that they were investigating students. And I mean, I'm sure none of us thought that much would actually come of it. So these are legitimate punishments for people that were involved in these. And I am certainly of the opinion that the severity of the punishments had something to do with the settlement as well.
Yeah, I'm very happy about all this. Obviously, I think I'm reassured by the fact that so many of the top DOJ officials signed off on it. It really seems like, one, it's a huge fine. $200 million from a university is nothing trivial, just to, essentially compensate for all the past harm. And then it really looks like there's going to be continuous monitoring to making sure that these universities conduct themselves in a better way, and a chance, if they are simply unreformable, to put them back into this terrible position where they're under relegation threat constantly. So I'm very optimistic about what's happening here.
I think it's also worth noting, it could be that this is the template for, and maybe sets a floor at least, for other potential settlement agreements with other schools. Vigorous enforcement is the only way that you could potentially change the behavior at these institutions. So to that end, I think this is a fine use of federal government power to rein in a beneficiary of government largesse that has allowed for the systematic discrimination against the rights of students. By the way, of course, in complete contravention, completely flouting the ethos of Columbia, my alma mater, which is supposed to be about a genuinely classical liberal education and all the other things, of course, that our institutions of higher education have completely rejected, essentially, and overturned as they've been corrupted over the last number of decades. And the last point I'll make is that it is interesting to note Columbia's posture here, Columbia yielding to the administration, essentially, whereas Harvard continues to resist. And maybe it'll be that you're going to have differing responses from different schools, just like we've seen differing responses, for example, to the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action in the way that they try to either comply with or skirt essentially what the Supreme Court set forth. We may see different tacks from different educational institutions. I suspect, it's just my inclination, that it seems to some extent like Harvard is trying to play the role of the resistance, and they think that that ultimately is going to prove more beneficial than seeking to cooperate and come to some agreement. But Columbia chose a different path here, and it'll be interesting to see where all of the different institutions shake out as the administration continues to vigorously enforce law, rules, and regulations.
All right, with that, it's my turn on the U.S. attorney situation. So this isn't too complicated, but it's something that everybody needs to be paying attention to if you're caring about, law enforcement. There was big drama in the District of New Jersey where Alina Habba, who was appointed by Pam Bondi as a temporary attorney general, what is running down her 120-day term, and the District of New Jersey, in exercising what appears to be its right by statute, appointed somebody completely different to be the new head prosecutor in the District of New Jersey. Now, I say it's the right by statute, but it's not clear at all that this is constitutional, because if you think about it, this is judges appointing a prosecutor that's supposed to serve under President Trump against the will of President Trump. And so under the Department of Justice quickly proceeded to fire the person who the judges appointed. And there's a number of ways in which they are probably going to be able to reappoint Alina Habba, even in the face of this statute, which include, you could name her the first assistant U.S. attorney, which is an inferior officer position. But in the absence of there being an actual U.S. attorney, she would become the acting U.S. attorney. Alternatively, it's not clear at all that she couldn't just be reappointed by Pam Bondi indefinitely. The statute is ambiguous on that point. But this isn't just a problem for Habba, who's kind of most notable because she was obviously President Trump's personal lawyer. This is also impacting Bill Asaley, who's currently the U.S. attorney in the Central District of California, which covers Los Angeles. And that's important because in L.A., Asaley is doing an incredible job of dealing with L.A. sanctuary city policies. The big move that he's made is, instead of just relying on ICE detainer requests to bring in criminal aliens and get them deported, which local and state authorities can ignore because they don't have an obligation to comply with ICE, he's instead indicting these people on federal crimes related to their illegal presence and then using federal judicial warrants to remove them from state and local custody and to arrest them in state and local courthouses. And because they're federal judicial warrants, they just can't be ignored by local authorities in the same way these ICE detainers can, and the sanctuary policies don't matter. Obviously, California authorities hate this because apparently they just want as many illegal immigrants as possible in their country and to stay in their state and to stay as long as they can. But that's not okay with the rest of us. Asaley's out there fighting for Trump's policies, and as a result, he's not getting blue slips from either Adam Schiff or Jose Padilla, the senator who bum rushed Kristi Noem a few weeks back before it was booted out of the news cycle by the Iran strike. So, this problem of these temporary appointments not getting confirmed, the fact that the Senate is not confirming people at any sort of rapid rate because of Democrat obstruction, and still the Senate is thinking about going on recess for a month, despite this massive backlog of Trump appointees that aren't taking office. There's things that the administration can do, obviously, to try and counteract this, but it would still be good if the Senate was working. And I think John Thune, he's got to be willing to inflict more pain on the Democrats if they're going to completely bring the appointment of Trump administration officials to a slog.
Yeah, so I agree. There are kind of two key elements to this. One is, and I think this is the underlying issue that will probably continue to shine a brighter and brighter light on in the months ahead, is why aren't these people getting confirmed? Why isn't the Senate using every second, every minute, every hour to go about quickly and expeditiously getting these nominees confirmed to these positions? This is something that our old colleague Rachel Bovard has written about pretty extensively. If you want to get the administration's agenda enforced successfully, then you need to have the personnel to faithfully implement and execute the policies. So that's number one. And I think that Senate leadership needs to be held account, probably by the right, for not moving heaven and earth to get people at all levels confirmed quickly. And the other aspect is, and I think this probably leads to some interesting constitutional sorts of questions, maybe ones that'll come before the Supreme Court, sort of analogous to what we've talked about before with Humphrey's executor and independent agencies and what the president's authority is in terms of appointing his underlings and delegating power. Why should federal judges be able to sideline someone who is temporarily in office? Now, there are also issues, and the lawyers here might have read more closely than I have about this, but I remember in context of Ed Martin looking at this, interim appointees versus acting appointees and what the statutes look like around U.S. attorneys are kind of interesting in terms of creative ways that you might be able to bridge in some of these positions to ultimately get the person you want in these seats. But I think it should be an open question, probably, of, should it be lawful that you can have federal judges basically responsible for usurping the president's powers and appointing what ought to be a presidential appointee for these positions. Maybe an interesting question, maybe a test case that perhaps the Trump administration is planning on itself pushing to the extent we see federal judges in places like New Jersey operate as they have in the Haba situation.
And that's exactly the commentary that Alan Dershowitz has provided on the situation, which is that it's blatantly unconstitutional because in this case, you're basically giving the judges more power than the executive branch has in a position that is supposed to be chosen by the executive branch. And he thinks that it'll end up at the Supreme Court as well.
Yeah, I think this is the bottom line that we're going to see coming up in a lot of different contexts. We need a ruling from the Supreme Court on the very basic constitutional proposition that the president has the power to choose who works under him. I think it's very basic. I think that Congress does not have the right to interfere, nor does the judiciary really to a large extent. There may be some limited carve-outs and exceptions, but we need to flip the presumption here, which is that the presumption, the obvious constitutional presumption, is that the president needs to have control over the people who work for him in order to faithfully execute the laws and to carry out his duties under Article 2. That's the bottom line. The second small point is just the blue slip thing in the Senate is a courtesy. It's a courtesy that can be withdrawn when it's exercised in bad faith, and I think that, and has been withdrawn multiple times in the past. I think this is clearly an instance where that should be exercised.
All right, with that, we'll kick it over to Amber talking about the DEMS in 2028.
Yes, I'll keep this one relatively brief, but just providing an update on where the 2028 jockeying from the Democrats stands at this moment. You have the sort of classic race to the middle from a lot of these Dems, including Gavin Newsom, who the progressives are really angry at because several children's hospitals recently capitulated to the Trump administration's executive order banning them from providing sex change procedures and medicine to minors. Apparently Newsom was supposed to stop that somehow, but nonetheless, he of course also recently appeared on the Sean Ryan podcast where he was acting like he was all cool with guns and he's not antithetical to the Second Amendment and how he understands people's concerns about the transgender issue and women's sports and all of that. Rahm Emanuel recently on the Megyn Kelly podcast also saying that he thinks the men playing in women's sports issue is crazy. Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, just did a massive Vogue profile with him and his wife taking photos around the house. And there's one particular photo that I encourage everyone to go look at because it just cracked me up. His 16 or 17-year-old son is throwing a pitch to Andy Beshear, who has his catcher's glove on. And his 14, 15-year-old daughter is behind him, sort of watching eagerly while his wife stands off to the side. And they're literally like 10 feet apart in the photo. So it's so ridiculously staged and so obviously staged, which of course Vogue photo shoots are staged, but just the fact that they didn't even try to make it realistic so that they could fit everybody in the shot was especially hilarious to me. And they spend this entire profile talking about how Andy Beshear is the sort of poster child for how Democrats can win in Trump states and red states. They described Kentucky as deep red, which is really not accurate if you know anything about Kentucky political history. Yes, they went overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, but it's actually very similar to the blue wall states in that this is a very union heavy area that kind of flipped to Trump after Obama and has consistently elected a lot of Democratic governors and statewide politicians. That's not reflected right now in the House and the Senate, but it's by no means just a Republican stronghold as the Democrats have been trying to say. And Beshear, of course, also is the son of a former governor as well. So he has this political dynasty element to him, where if he's going to try to pretend to be the working class hero of Kentucky, his opponents are going to have plenty of fodder to go after him for that. Roy Cooper, former North Carolina governor, apparently running for Senate, which could be a launching pad to a 2028 campaign. Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania recently hired tons of communication staffers, basically doubling his comm staff. A lot of people, of course, think that he's going to run. People wanted him to be Kamala's running mate in the last election, which didn't work out too well because a heavy part of the Democratic progressive base is anti-Semitic. And then finally, Tim Walz actually ruled out running in 2028. He said he is not going to run again, I guess because he got so thoroughly embarrassed on the campaign trail last time. But I'll just kick it to the group for some maybe brief remarks on what do you think of all of these developments and who kind of has the best positioning, which granted we're 3 years out, right? But who kind of has the best positioning at this current moment to try to take over this very deeply fractured and rudderless Democratic Party?
I don't think we know yet which direction the Democratic Party is going to go. It's pretty clear that there are two paths solidifying. I can't imagine them choosing the latter that I'm about to lay out. But the first is clearly the Mandami path, right? The Zohran Mandami campaign, which doubles down not only on socialist economics, but doubles down on all of the unpopular culture war woke stuff and just says, this is we just had to do this harder. We have to be more, we have to go do this harder. And that's the path that's going to be, I don't know that they're going to be able to avoid taking that path, given the power of the Democratic base that turned out for somebody like Zohran in New York City. Like there is a core contingent. It's not that it's representative of the country, but that's the Democratic problem, right? It is representative of their base. And so there's the other path, which is, I guess, I don't even want to label it sanity as much as just recognizing certain political realities and trying to maneuver around them, right? And that's where you see candidates like Shapiro potentially trying to position themselves as like moderate, separating themselves from the Great Awakening, going so far as to pretend it didn't really happen, which I don't think is going to be very convincing to people. And there, I think it's really important, especially on a couple of these very unpopular issues, that Republicans running against these candidates in local races, and then ultimately Republicans on the national level, continue to hammer that all of these people who call themselves moderates or try to move away or try to downplay some of these unpopular issues are on record as supporting them. And I think, for example, just to give you one example, there is a candidate in New Jersey for the New Jersey governor's race, Mickey Sherrill. I'm sure Ben knows more about her than I do, but she has been trying to position herself as a moderate on the trans issue. At the same time, she voted twice in Congress to not bar men from women's sports. So it's just this very dishonest game in terms of who comes out ahead. I don't know which path is going to come out, ahead in the Democratic Party. I tend to think that it's going to be more of the Mondami path because I just don't think they can afford to lose the energy of their base. And that's the uncomfortable rock and a hard place that Democrats are in politics right now. But I wouldn't underestimate somebody like Newsom who can literally just lie and be on both sides of that track and make everybody happy, depending on who he's talking to today.
Yeah, I mean, Newsom is doing something smart for a general, but I don't think he has the gas to beat somebody like AOC, who's just got this enormous base of support and donors among the hard left, the type of people who vote in elections. The fact that Mamdani won the New York primary is evidence that this is the ascendant wing of the party. And it's really too bad because these people are basically communists. And it's just yet another example of why it's so important to be in the party. And, kind of as a side note, I've had discussions with people about I'm not really very publicly critical of the Trump administration. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of them is that I can pick up the phone and call them at any time if I just have a problem. I don't need to put them on blast before I give somebody a phone call. And then the second reason is that the Democrats are so insane that why would I not be part of the team? I want to be part of the team that defeats these people who want to impose communism on us. So, if AOC is the next Democratic leader, then it's going to be a matter of civilizational importance to keep her out of the White House.
So, I mean, I've been on record since I wrote my book on Ilhan Omar 5 years ago that I think that the progressives will dominate, if not at that point already had started to dominate the Democrat Party. And I think ultimately that Democrat leadership will reflect the fact that it's the progressive base. And incidentally, of course, generally the upper middle class elite progressive base that does dominate the party and that their candidates and their leaders will reflect that base. And there's tensions here. Obviously, there's ideological tensions, and also there's the tensions over what is electable, what appeals to a majority. And there's an obvious tension there because most people in America do not have the same worldview as the 20% or less that constitute the radicals. But the radicals have outsized power. They're mouthpieces. They dominate most of the media entities. You see the same, there's a parallel struggle that's happened in recent years at the legacy media entities like the New York Times as within Democrat leadership itself. I don't know that the young Turks, so to speak, are necessarily going to be the majority of the Democrat Party yet, and that that's going to be reflected in leadership. But it's very clear that that is where the energy is, that is where the enthusiasm is. So I make no predictions about whether, we're looking at more of the AOC Mamdani mold candidate or more like the Josh Shapiro candidate. If Democrats care most about winning, then I think they probably go more for the Shapiro or I guess Newsom, to the extent you say that he is a total liar and willing to say or do whatever it takes to win. How he does, though, and how much that quote unquote moderate candidate or more practical, pragmatic candidate, so called, how they go about not provoking and inflaming is a real massive open question on their side. Can you essentially balance out the wings of the Democrat Party? It's not necessarily clear to me. So if I'm putting my chips down, I think I probably say, who is the most compelling radical that is perceived to be non-provocative and electable and inoffensive? And I don't know if that candidate exists today. And it may be who looks like they're going to be the Republican nominee. And does that dictate ultimately who catches fire on the Democrat side? I don't know that any of the names that we've mentioned so far are actually going to be the ones yet, even though they obviously all think that they are in for 2028. So make no predictions, but I still say that the progressives will inherit the earth on the Democrat side.
All right. We'll go to final thoughts. I'll do take the honor here. Candace Owens is getting sued by Emmanuel Macron and his wife. Candace Owens is getting sued for defamation because she continues to insist that Emmanuel Macron's wife is in fact a man. There's been some funny takes on this. Like I had an interesting discussion with Michael Knowles yesterday where he's like, query whether or not you can actually have a reckless disregard for the truth in modern society if it says somebody is either a man or a woman, because the question is so ambiguous in the modern world. It's impossible to have a reckless disregard. But having actually read the complaint, I think Candace Owens is real trouble, and everybody who's dismissing this as being very flippant. She has extremely good lawyers who have worked very hard to diligently provide letters and proof to Candace Owens that what she's saying is false. And not only has she not changed her course, she's waved those letters around on her live stream saying, they've tried to send me a cease and desist, but I'm not gonna. I still think Bridget Macron is a man. I think she's in real trouble. And I think it's a good indicator of, eventually, if you keep saying reckless things to injure somebody else's reputation and you refuse to correct the record when evidence is provided proving you fought that you're not telling the truth, that's what defamation law exists for. So anyway, that's my final thought.
Isn't it funny that even 5 years ago that would have sounded like Mad Libs, but I mean, just insane story. My final thoughts are on Hulk Hogan. Just shortly before we started recording this podcast, it was announced that he passed away at the age of 71. After suffering cardiac arrest. Great American hero, patriot, obviously massive entertainer. I'm sure a lot of us grew up watching him on WWF and then WWE, but he perhaps most recently spoke at the Republican National Convention to support Donald Trump. And I was so lucky to be in the crowd for that. It was honestly the shining moment of the RNC. The crowd there was so loud screaming for him when he ripped his shirt off. You couldn't even hear what he was saying, and it didn't matter because the energy was just unreal. But he was someone who made a career out of being patriotic, of using Americana imagery. His theme song was Real American. I mean, you just don't have cultural heroes like that anymore. And so I hope that he rests in peace. We'll be praying for him and his family. Very sad news. Of course, Ozzy Osbourne, also great American rocker, passed away this week too. So tough week for celebrity death news.
Yeah, just to add one thing that on Will's point, a point that he made on social media that I think is worth highlighting. There's a lot of cope going on in the Candace lawsuit about the venue being in Delaware. That actually is just because Candace decided to incorporate in Delaware, as many people do, because Delaware is known for being the most favorable to corporations legally and tax wise. So that is not a conspiracy about the Bidens. That is her choice to incorporate in Delaware. In terms of just adding to the discussion about the future of the Democratic Party, I do think there's a generational story to be had here. I think part of the reason that Ben is correct that I can't see the Democratic Party really pulling from the progressive sort of track, even though they will repeatedly see that America doesn't want to go down that path and they're going to lose elections, is because of the generational turnover from the boomers to millennials primarily, right? The all of the up and coming Democratic, a lot of them are millennials. Gavin Newsom's a little older, but a lot of them are millennials. I think it demonstrates the differences, even though we've seen that pyramid almost flip with regard to the generations. We've always thought, oh, like young people are liberal, old people are conservative. Now we see that a lot of boomers are, in fact, strong Democratic voters, and a lot of Gen Z are going to be Republicans for the foreseeable future. Still, among those Democratic boomers, their ideas of what is going on, they hate Trump, right? But their assumptions are still very much sort of patriotic in a certain way. They think America is something that it hasn't been for generations. And I think you saw this with some of the No Kings protests, like who came out for those protests, the kind of imagery that they were using, American flags, right? And then I think that there's that generational turnover in the Democratic Party to millennials. And if you're on the left and you're a millennial, you have spent your entire life in educational institutions and cultural institutions that inculcated deeply the idea that America is racist, is not worth being patriotic about. There is nothing good about the society, and everything that's good about America was built on oppression and stealing from those around the world and within the country who didn't deserve it, right? So there is that fundamental worldview shift, and I think that the Democratic Party is not going to avoid that. On the Republican side, I think there's the same kind of generational turnover, which is why elder millennials and Gen X are basically taking over the Republican Party. Think about here all of the, sort of senators, famous senators of the last 10 years in the Republican Party, whether that's, Ted Cruz, like I'm blanking out here, but Tom Cotton is also in this category, right? Ron DeSantis not in the Senate, but the governor in Florida, right? They're all these Gen X guys. And of course, JD Vance is elder millennial. He's like on the edge between millennial and Gen Z. So you're seeing that all of the assumptions, you're seeing the same turnover between the boomer cons and the slightly younger generation. I want to say slightly because I'm a millennial, right? Like we always say that we're young. We're not it anymore, guys. We're old, but we are younger than the boomers and the gerontocracy that has been running our country for a while. So, people in their 40s and even 50s have very different underlying assumptions. You're going to see that reflected in changes in the Republican Party. And then hot on our heels are the base Gen Z that are going to come up in the Republican Party. I think they are going to transform certain things about the Republican Party for better or for worse. So, I think there's just a kind of interesting generational story about the boomers sort of passing out of politics and what that's going to do. There's going to be some, I think, long overdue corrections. I also think, we might miss them when we're gone. We complain about them a lot. So we might end up being nostalgic about some things about the boomer cons. Anyway, that's my little generational spiel about politics.
Thanks for reminding us that we're old. Just one quick note from me. Ozzy Osbourne is English, but lived in California for the last 2 decades or so, and of course had the famous show The Osbournes. So very much in American culture, I think, more than British culture at this point.
So I will finish this crazy train, so to speak, by
That's
returning to. There we go. That's the segue that we needed for my parting shot around Russiagate and all the gory details of Russiagate, which I will not rehash here. But I do think that it is worth emphasizing something, which is that so many people's lives were destroyed, their reputations were sullied, their finances were drained, their families' lives were upended, and they will never fully recover from what our national security, law enforcement, and intelligence apparatus did to America in foisting the ultimate information operation on the American people and really seeking to effectively disenfranchise tens of millions of America on the back of fraudulent claims that the leader of a party representing half the country was a traitor to Russia. And obviously, of course, with humongous knock-on effects when it comes to destabilizing and casting a pall over and really subverting and paralyzing at least the first 2 years of the first Trump presidency. And at the end of the day, there's a question of how can you actually make the country and those immediately impacted whole? How can there be restitution and justice at the end of the day for what has occurred? Obviously, the first step is full transparency. So we're 9 years on, and we're still finding out these incredible revelations this far down the road, this far removed from when the bad actors began engaging in their corrupt, if not criminal, behavior. And at the end of the day, then we go to what might the charges look like. And even if you have any number of people from Barack Obama on down, dead to rights, nailed in having committed crimes, is there a venue where you'll have a jury that would actually convict them? If you bring the prosecutions, obviously, and they're successful, there are costs and benefits to it. If they're unsuccessful, there are costs to that as well. And this requires balancing out all of these competing sort of impetuses or impeti here of doing what is right versus what is the most efficacious way to pursue it. Is the process as punishment enough? Is hauling people in front of Congress and subpoenaing them and getting a full accounting the best we're going to do in the way of justice? If you don't bring these people to justice, then don't you guarantee that there is no deterrent in the future to this sort of egregious behavior, these attacks on our republic? These are very serious questions that our leaders have to be weighing right now. And I hope they make the right choice, because at the end of the day, really, the future of the republic, to some extent, rests on whether a rotten ruling regime will pay serious consequences. Because if they don't, when they come back into power, you can imagine what they will do after what we just saw during the prior 4 years under Joe Biden. So in some ways, these are incredibly opportunistic times. In other ways, they're very perilous times. And I hope that decision makers make the right decisions when it comes to Russiagate and justice.
All right. Final reminder that, again, you should be going to the National Conservatism Conference September 2nd to 4th in Washington, D.C. Register now at nationalconservatism.org. And on behalf of Ben, Amber, and Inez, thanks for tuning in. I'm Will Chamberlain, and we'll see you at the next NatCon Squad.